There's a guy I think about sometimes. 58 years old. Gets up at 6, makes his coffee, and before he even sits down, he opens the Fidelity app. $1,500,000 staring back at him. Every morning, same number, give or take. Last week, he called his wife into the kitchen to argue about the internet bill. Went up $15. $15. He has the money. He just can't feel it. And I don't say that to judge him. I've been close enough to that feeling to recognize it. That tightness in your chest when you glance at your phone and the market's red. Even when you know, logically, you won't touch that money for 5 more years. The knowing doesn't stop the feeling. There's a system designed to make you feel exactly this way. The financial media has been running the same playbook for a decade. Drop a big number. $2 million, $3 million. Repeat it enough times, and people start believing that's the entry fee for a decent retirement. Work longer. Take more risk. Do whatever it takes to hit that number. What they don't mention is that the number isn't the point. Fidelity's own data shows the median retirement savings for Americans in their 60s sits somewhere around $185,000. The $3 million benchmark isn't describing the middle class. It's describing a world most people will never live in. And chasing it is costing people real years of their real lives. The real number isn't your balance. It's how many fixed bills you can cover before you touch your portfolio, and whether you can sleep at night without knowing the answer. That's a completely different question, and it's one that most financial content refuses to ask. There are 5 types of retirees who are genuinely in the top 1% of financial well-being, and most of them don't have $3 million. Some of them haven't even crossed $1 million. What they have is something harder to build and easier to overlook. If you recognize yourself in at least one of these 5, you're probably richer than you think. Let's start with the type that generates the most arguments on every personal finance forum. The arguments make sense on paper. They just don't account for what it actually feels like to carry a mortgage into a red market. If you're Gen AX and you're exhausted from measuring yourself against numbers that were never built for your life, hit subscribe. Wes Investor exists to help you retire on reality, not on fear. Let's talk about David. David is 59. Mechanical engineer, good career, solid saver. His financial advisor is sharp, the kind of guy who builds actual Excel models, not just talks about them. And for years, the models said the same thing, keep the mortgage. The logic was clean. David had a 3% mortgage. Historically, a diversified portfolio returns somewhere around 7% over time. The spread is 4%. On paper, paying off the house early is just leaving money on the table. David kept the mortgage, kept investing the difference, watched his portfolio climb, and then the market dropped 18% in a correction. Nothing catastrophic, just a normal bad year. David didn't sleep for 3 weeks. Every time the market dipped, his brain ran the same calculation. Less portfolio value, same mortgage payment, same mortgage payment, same mortgage payment. He came within one conversation of selling everything and moving to cash, which would have locked in every loss. He didn't. But he also didn't forget how that felt. 2 years later, he used a chunk of savings to pay off the house. His advisor wasn't thrilled. The spreadsheet still didn't love it. David slept fine the next time the market dropped. I'll admit something here. I used to tell people the same thing his advisor did. Don't pay off a 3% loan. That's cheap money. I was looking at the spreadsheet and ignoring the person holding it. People don't live inside Excel. They live inside their nervous systems. I mean, I knew that theoretically. Took me a while to actually factor it in. So let's talk about what debt-free actually means in dollar terms, because it's not just psychological. Say your mortgage payment is $2,500 a month. That's $30,000 a year in fixed obligations. Under a 5% withdrawal rate, you'd need $600,000 in your portfolio just to cover that one bill. Just the house payment, nothing else. Pay off the mortgage, and you've effectively given yourself $600,000 of breathing room without adding a single dollar to your account. Run that number against your own mortgage. The result is usually bigger than people expect. That's not a small number. That's the difference between a retirement plan that requires your portfolio to perform and one that doesn't. Now, I'm not saying this works for everyone. If you have a 2.75% rate locked in from 2020 and 20 years of compounding ahead of you, the math may still favor keeping the loan. Context matters. But here's where the conventional advice gets the framing wrong. It treats this as a pure return optimization problem. It isn't. It's a risk management problem. When you carry a mortgage into retirement, you're introducing what's called sequence of returns risk. The market drops 25%, but your mortgage is still due on the 1st. A $2,500 monthly obligation doesn't care what the S&P 500 is doing. The retirees who weather downturns without panic selling are almost always the ones whose basic costs are covered no matter what the market does. That's a structural advantage. Debt-free gives you the floor. But having a floor doesn't mean you'll let yourself use it. That's the thing nobody warns you about. That's the condition that quietly traps more Gen X retirees than anything else. And it's what we're going into next. Meet Susan. 62 years old. Spent her career as a nurse. 31 years of 12-hour shifts, holidays away from her kids. The kind of work that grinds you down in ways that don't show up on a pay stub. She has $1,200,000 in her retirement account. She built that on a nurse's salary, through discipline and consistency, through decades of maxing out her 403b when her colleagues were buying boats. She drives a 2009 Honda Civic with a recurring transmission problem. She's been meaning to get it looked at. Her grandkids live in Portland. She hasn't visited in 14 months because the flights feel like a lot right now. Susan is not struggling. Susan is one of the most financially successful people in her zip code, and she is living, quietly, like someone who is afraid. Here's the mechanism worth understanding, because this isn't about discipline or character. It's about how the brain gets trained. For 30 years, Susan's financial identity was built around one signal. The number goes up. Every month, the balance increased, and that increase was the proof that she was doing it right. Safe, responsible, in control. Retirement broke that signal. Now the number is supposed to go down. That's literally the plan. And her nervous system treats every withdrawal like a warning alarm. This is what researchers call the retirement spending gap. Vanguard has tracked this across thousands of retirees. People consistently underspend relative to what their portfolios can safely support. Not by a little. Meaningfully. If Susan's in that group, and she is, that gap isn't caution. It's just money not being used. The psychology of accumulation doesn't automatically flip into a psychology of distribution just because you file the paperwork. I've watched this happen enough times to recognize it. And I'll be honest. I caught myself doing a version of it. Hit a portfolio milestone I'd been working toward for years, took my wife out to a nice dinner, and spent half the meal looking at the right column of the menu before I ordered. 30 years of watch what you spend doesn't uninstall overnight. Now, the math here is actually freeing once you look at it directly. The 4% rule, or its more updated version, puts sustainable withdrawals somewhere between 3.5% and 5%. That range shifts based on how long you need the money to last and how your portfolio is built. Here's what that means practically. If you spend $50,000 a year, you need about $1,250,000 to fund that indefinitely. If you spend $80,000 a year, you need $2 million. That's a $750,000 difference, driven entirely by lifestyle cost, not portfolio size. Susan, with $1,200,000, can comfortably spend $48,000 to $60,000 a year. She's not doing that. She's spending closer to $32,000. The gap isn't protecting her. It's just sitting there while she skips flights to Portland. What nobody says out loud, the window closes. Between roughly 60 and 70, most people have the three things that matter: money, time, and health, overlapping in the same decade. Knees get replaced, energy shifts. The trip to Portugal you keep postponing gets quietly moved from someday to probably not. Dealing with $2 million unspent isn't a victory. It usually means the fear made every decision, and the money just came along for the ride. And here's the thing: Susan's $1,200,000 isn't going anywhere. The math supports a meaningful upgrade to her life. What's missing isn't permission from the numbers. What's missing is a psychological framework that gives her permission from herself. Spending after decades of saving isn't irresponsible. It's the whole point. The best antidote to saver's paralysis, the most practical one, is having an income stream that arrives whether you spend or not. Something that makes the withdrawal feel less like dismantling what you built and more like collecting what you're owed. That's exactly what type number 3 has figured out. And it changes everything about how retirement actually feels day to day. How many of you watching this recognize that feeling? The account is growing, or at least holding, and you still feel like you shouldn't spend it. Drop May in the comments. You're not alone in this. Gary taught high school history for 28 years. His wife spent 22 years in the Army. Between the two of them, they have about $200,000 in retirement savings. By the metrics that get thrown around on financial YouTube, they're nowhere close to ready. The $3 million crowd would look at their balance sheet and wince. Gary and his wife take 3 trips a year. They redid their kitchen last fall. They sleep fine. Their combined Social Security and pension income comes to $5,500 a month. Before they touch a single dollar of that $200,000, their rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, and car payment are already covered. With a few hundred left over, the $200,000 isn't their lifeline. It's their fun money. Every retiree has what you could call a fixed cost floor. The number that has to be covered every month, no matter what. Housing, food, utilities, basic health care. For most households, that runs somewhere between $3,500 and $5,000 a month, depending on where you live and whether you're carrying debt. When guaranteed income, Social Security, a pension, an annuity, covers that floor completely, something structural shifts in how a portfolio behaves. Your investments no longer have to perform every single month. They don't need to fund your rent in a bad quarter. They can ride out a 20% correction without you being forced to sell anything, because nothing essential depends on them in the short term. That's not a small advantage. That's the difference between a portfolio that works for you and one you have to work around. The retirees who stay calmest in a downturn. I've watched this repeat enough times to trust it. Almost never have the biggest portfolios. They're the ones whose essential costs are already spoken for before the market opens on Monday morning. Now, there's a trap buried in this category that costs people real money, and it's worth naming clearly. Social Security can be claimed as early as 62. A lot of people do it. Sometimes because they need to, sometimes because they've heard the government might run out of money and want to lock something in. The cost of that decision is permanent. Claiming at 62 instead of your full retirement age reduces your benefit by roughly 25% to 30%, permanently, every month for the rest of your life. If your full retirement age benefit is $2,200 a month, claiming at 62 drops that to around $1,540. That's $660 a month you're leaving on the table. every month for what could be a 20 or 25-year retirement. Over 20 years, that gap adds up to more than $158,000 in lost income. And that's before you factor in the cost of living adjustments that stack on top of a higher base. That's not a rounding error. That's a car, a kitchen renovation, 3 years of travel, just from one decision made at 62. Delaying to 70 pushes the benefit even further, roughly 8% more per year past full retirement age. For most people in decent health, that's the lowest risk, highest leverage move available to them. Timing matters just as much as how much you've accumulated, maybe more. If your essential expenses run $4,000 a month and your guaranteed income comes to $4,500, you are, in a very real sense, recession-proof. The market can drop 30%. Your lights stay on. Your mortgage gets paid. Your portfolio gets to recover at its own pace. That's what Gary and his wife built. Not through a massive savings rate, through a combination of time, patience on Social Security timing, and 2 careers that happen to come with guaranteed income attached. But here's the catch. A guaranteed income stream can quietly become a tax problem if you're not paying attention. The wrong withdrawal decision, even a small one, can trigger costs that follow you for an entire year. That's what type number 4 has learned to navigate. And the numbers are specific enough to be worth walking through carefully. Richard and Susan had been looking forward to this trip for 2 years. Italy, 3 weeks. The kind of vacation you promise yourself after the kids are grown and the mortgage is manageable. They were 65. The money was there. They pulled an extra $1,000 from their traditional IRAs to cover the spending cushion. A small buffer just to feel comfortable. That $1,000 pushed their modified, adjusted gross income just over a threshold they didn't know existed. The bill arrived months later. Not from the IRS, from Medicare. An IRMA surcharge, triggered by that one withdrawal, applied to both of them for the entire following year. What started as a $1,000 vacation buffer ended up costing them several $1,000s in additional Medicare premiums. They took the trip, but they came home to a lesson that their financial advisor had never once mentioned. Most Gen X households have spent their working lives putting money into tax-deferred accounts. Traditional 401ks, traditional IRAs, the deal was straightforward: defer the tax now, pay it later. Later is now. And the problem is that later has more moving parts than anyone explained at the enrollment meeting. Your taxable income in retirement doesn't just affect your federal tax bracket. It affects your Medicare premiums. That one alone catches most people off guard. It also affects how much of your Social Security gets taxed and your eligibility for certain deductions. These thresholds don't bend. They're cliffs. $1 over the line and the surcharge kicks in for the full year. IRMA, the income-related monthly adjustment amount, is calculated based on your MAGI from 2 years prior. What you earn at 63 affects your Medicare bill at 65. The lag makes it easy to forget until the statement arrives. If you're between 55 and 65 right now, you're likely sitting in what tax planners call the gap years. After your peak earning stops and before Social Security and RMDs begin, your taxable income is probably lower than it's been in decades. That gap is an opportunity to pay tax on your terms instead of the government's. Roth conversions during this window mean moving money from your traditional IRAs into a Roth, paying ordinary income tax now at a lower rate so that money grows and comes out later completely tax-free. You're paying tax on the seed instead of the harvest. It's not a glamorous move, but Richard and Susan's kind of mistake doesn't happen to people who've already made it. The urgency in 2025 and 2026 specifically. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act brackets are set to expire at the end of 2026. When they do, rates are scheduled to revert to pre-2018 levels, meaningfully higher across most brackets. Converting now, while the lower rates still exist, is one of the more straightforward planning moves available. Think of it this way. If your effective federal rate on a Roth conversion today is 22%, and in 2 years it climbs to 25% or higher, plus state taxes plus the IRMAR interaction, the cost of waiting adds up quietly. And then there's the RMD's problem on the back end. The Secure 2.0 Act pushed the required minimum distribution age to 73. That sounds like relief. In practice, it means more years of compounding inside a tax-deferred account, which means larger RMDs when they finally hit. A large traditional IRAs at 73 doesn't give you flexibility. It gives you mandatory taxable income whether you need it or not, at whatever rate Congress has set by then. Depending on your balance, that could push $30,000 or more of taxable income into a year you weren't planning for. The retirees who navigate this well aren't necessarily the ones with the most money. They're the ones who treated their account types as separate tools with different tax profiles and moved assets deliberately between them during the years when they had room to choose. That's the invisible work, and it tends to be worth more than anything posted on financial Twitter. Manage the debt, manage the psychology, build the income floor, protect what you keep. That's 99% of the equation. The last 1% is a mindset shift that makes all of it more durable. And it's simpler than anything we've covered so far. This one doesn't require a complicated setup. Think back to the last real market downturn you lived through. Doesn't matter which one. Pick any of them. The people who got hurt the most weren't always the ones with the smallest portfolios. They were the ones with the most rigid plans. Fixed withdrawal amount. Fixed expenses. No room to move. Rigid plan in a 30% drawdown means selling at exactly the wrong time to cover a $3,200 mortgage payment. When the portfolio dropped, the math still demanded the same number every month. So they sold, at the bottom or close to it, locked in the loss, and spent the next 3 years watching the recovery happen without them, because the shares were already gone. Meanwhile, there was another group. Similar age, similar balances. They looked at the downturn and made one adjustment. They postponed a trip, skipped a kitchen renovation, pulled back discretionary spending by maybe $400 a month for a year. They didn't touch the portfolio. They waited. The market recovered, as it has every single time in modern history, and their share count was intact. Same storm. Completely different outcome. The difference wasn't income or net worth. It was structure. Most retirement spending falls into 3 categories, whether people label them that way or not. Essential is the stuff that doesn't negotiate: housing, food, healthcare. Flexible is everything you can dial back without real pain: dining out less, delaying a car. And then there's discretionary: the trip, the renovation, the stuff that's genuinely optional. The flexibility strategist keeps those categories genuinely separate, not just in a spreadsheet, but in how they think about a market downturn. When things get rough, they pull back on discretionary first, flexible second if needed. Essential never moves. This means they never have to make a panic decision with permanent consequences just to cover a temporary shortfall. The math on this is worth sitting with for a moment. The standard 4% rule assumes a fixed withdrawal, adjusted for inflation every year regardless of what the market is doing. It works reasonably well in backtests, but it has a fragility problem. It doesn't bend. A guardrails approach does. The basic version: you allow yourself to spend up to 5% in strong market years, and you commit to pulling back to 3.5% in down years. The range is 3.5% to 5% instead of a fixed 4%. That one adjustment, the willingness to cut spending by roughly 10% to 15% for a year or two when conditions warrant, dramatically improves long-term portfolio survival rates. We're talking about the difference between a plan that might run out at 88 and one that holds through 95. 7 years. That's what willingness to cut $400 a month for one bad year can buy you. Pulling back $400 a month for a year is manageable. Selling your portfolio at the bottom to cover rent is not. Flexibility isn't a consolation prize for people who didn't save enough. It's a deliberate design choice that makes every other part of the plan more durable. Debt-free gives you a lower floor. Lifestyle optimization gives you room to breathe. Guaranteed income holds the floor steady. Tax efficiency protects what you keep. And flexibility means none of those pieces crack under pressure when the market decides to remind you it doesn't follow a schedule. That's the full picture. And it's simpler than the $3 million narrative makes it sound. 5 types. 5 different profiles. None of them required $3 million to get there. Debt-free gave them their sleep back. Lifestyle optimization freed them from the guilt of actually spending what they built. Guaranteed income created a floor that the market can't touch. Tax efficiency protected the money that would have quietly leaked away. And flexibility made the whole structure durable enough to survive the years when nothing goes according to plan. These aren't 5 separate strategies. They're 5 expressions of the same underlying idea that retirement security is less about the size of the pile and more about how well the structure holds when things get uncomfortable. The $3 million headline isn't describing most people's lives. It's describing an anxiety. And anxiety is very good at making you feel behind, even when the actual picture is more stable than you think. Prosperity isn't measured by the number of zeros in your account. It's measured by the number of choices you have when you wake up in the morning. That sounds abstract until you actually have it. Then it's just Tuesday morning and you don't have to check anything. If you can choose whether to work, if you can choose whether to take the trip, if a bad market month doesn't change what you eat for dinner, you're already in the top 1% of financial freedom, whether or not the balance sheet says so. The headline was never describing you anyway. Make the plan. Clean up the debt. If the Roth window is still open for you, 2026 is the year to take it seriously and give yourself permission to actually use what 30 years of discipline built. If you recognized yourself somewhere in this video, hit like. Leave a comment, share it with someone in your circle who's been losing sleep over a number that was never the right number to begin with. See you in the next one.